गुड आफ्टरनून एवरीवन, नमस्कार। आप सबका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है आज के इस वेबिनार पर। आई वेलकम एवरीवन for this discussion on the very important webinar subject. And we have a very eminent panelists available today for speaking on the subject. We have the petitioner, Mr. Upadhyay. We have ex-Chief Election Commissioner of India, Mr. Krishnamurthy. We have Dr. Kakoli, Ghosh, Dastidar, who is an MP from Trinamool Congress. We have Dr. Ajit Ranade, who is an economist. And we have Mr. Alun, who's Alok Prasanna, who I would say he's a legal expert, though we have a lawyer in Mr. Upadhyay also. The idea of collecting this sort of panel was that we get different views and different perspectives on the issue. The issue undoubtedly is a very important one and has been hogging the headlines for the last number of days in the media, because the Supreme Court has held a number of hearings on the subject. And the outgoing Chief Justice of India mentioned that it is a very important subject and it requires great deliberation. And that is why I think now a 3-judge bench has been delegated the task of carrying this out further. And so without much ado, we will start. Just a couple of ground rules I would like to reiterate before we start. I will introduce the panelists as their turn comes to speak, a very brief introduction for the audience. And each panelist is requested to speak for 10 to 12 minutes. At the end of the session, we will have 15-20 minute question answer sessions, depending on the number of questions that the audience asks. And so the sequence will be as we had given out in the agenda. We will start with Mr. Ashwini Upadhyay, who is the petitioner in this case. A brief word about him. Mr. Upadhyay has done his law from the Chaudhry Charan Singh University, Meerut, and he's a practicing lawyer in the Supreme Court. He initially joined Aam Aadmi Party in 2012, but due to differences and various other reasons, he joined the BJP in November 2014 and is presently a member of the BJP and a spokesperson also, I think. He has filed a number of PILs on various issues ranging from social issues, religious issues, electoral processes, electoral reforms, and so on. So to start the ball rolling, I will request Shri Ashwini Upadhyay to kindly start, and I would request you to very briefly firstly outline what the PIL is so that people know, and what was your main stance, and what has been the stance of the government and the political parties and the various interveners during the hearings. आप हिंदी में, इंग्लिश में जैसा बोलना चाहें अश्विनी जी, कृपया शुरू करिए। धन्यवाद।
थैंक यू सर। दिसंबर में सुप्रीम कोर्ट की छुट्टियां चल रही थी, दिसंबर 2021 में, और उसी समय चुनाव का माहौल चल रहा था 5 राज्यों की विधानसभा का। तो मैंने अखबार में देखा कि लगातार पॉलिटिकल पार्टियां, पॉलिटिकल बॉसेस प्रॉमिस कर रहे हैं। यूपी की बारी आई तो यूपी में पता चला, एक ने कहा स्मार्टफोन देंगे, दूसरे ने कहा टैब देंगे, तीसरे ने कहा कि हम तो लैपटॉप देंगे, चौथे ने कहा लैपटॉप तो हमने पहले दे ही चुके हैं, अब की बार हम स्कूटी भी दे देंगे। फिर पंजाब की बारी ऐसे आई, किसी ने कहा हम 1000 रुपए और कैश देंगे हर जितने भी लोग हैं सबको, सभी महिलाओं को। दूसरे ने कहा हम 2000 देंगे, तीसरे ने कहा हम 3000 देंगे, गैस सिलेंडर 12 कर देंगे। ऐसे लगातार प्रॉमिसेस चल रही थी। सुप्रीम कोर्ट की छुट्टी थी तो मैंने कहा थोड़ा एनालिसिस करते हैं, आरबीआई की डेटा जाके देखते हैं। तो आरबीआई की डेटा पे जाके हमने देखा तो पता चला कि उसके पहले वाले मार्च में ही लगभग 60,000 करोड़ का कर्जा था राज्यों के ऊपर। यानी मैं दिसंबर में देख रहा था 2021 में 60,000 करोड़ कर्जा 31 मार्च 2021 को था राज्यों के ऊपर, जो अब बढ़ के 70 लाख करोड़ हो चुका है। पहले वो 60 लाख करोड़ था पिछले साल 2001 मार्च में। फिर स्टेट वाइज जाके देखा तो जहां पर स्कूटी देने की बात चल रही थी उत्तर प्रदेश में, वहां तो 6.5 लाख करोड़ का कर्जा था। पंजाब जैसा छोटा सा राज्य जहां 3 करोड़ से कम पॉपुलेशन, वहां 3 लाख करोड़ का कर्जा। ऐसे मतलब तमिलनाडु पे 6 लाख करोड़, बंगाल पे 4 लाख करोड़, बिहार पे भी 4 लाख करोड़, ऐसे ऐसे करके लगभग कितना बड़ा कर्जा। तो फिर मुझे लगा कि फिर सेंटर का अलग कर्जा, सेंटर का उस पर भी अलग से कर्जा। सिचुएशन ये थी कि स्टेट्स जो है अपनी, उनकी 70% रेवेन्यू तो केवल वेतन में जा रहा है, कुछ कैपिटल कहीं गेन हो रहा है नहीं रहा है, इन्वेस्टमेंट आ नहीं रहा है, पैसा कहीं से आ नहीं रहा है, और फिर भी प्रॉमिस के ऊपर प्रॉमिस। तो फिर हमने तय किया कि अब इसको कैसे इसको देखा जाए। तो हमने 2 पीआईएल फाइल किया। इनफैक्ट एक ही पीआईएल पे चर्चा हो रही है, दूसरी पीआईएल पे चर्चा नहीं हो गई, वो दब गई उसके बीच में। लेकिन एक्चुअली हमने 2 पीआईएल फाइल किया। एक पीआईएल तो हमने ये फाइल किया कि जो आर्बिट्रेरी फ्रीबीज है, मनमानी फ्रीबीज, जिसका कोई कैलकुलेशन नहीं, जिसका कोई ग्राउंड नहीं, जिसकी कोई जरूरत नहीं है, वो बंद होनी चाहिए। और दूसरी हमने पीआईएल फाइल किया कि जो वादा करो वो पूरा करो। तो 2 पीआईएल है एक्चुअली हमारी, लेकिन चर्चा केवल एक की होती है। एक में हमने कहा कि आप गलत वादा मत करो, इम्प्रैक्टिकल वादा मत करो। सबसे पहले वो चीजें आप प्रॉमिस करो जो जिससे हमारे फंडामेंटल राइट सिक्योर होते हैं, वो आप वादा करो जो हमारे डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल्स इंप्लीमेंट करने के लिए जरूरी है। और दूसरा हमने कहा कि जब आप फंडामेंटल राइट को सिक्योर करने के लिए, डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल को इंप्लीमेंट करने के लिए कुछ प्रॉमिस कर रहे हो, तो उसको इंप्लीमेंट जरूर करो। ये दोनों का जेनेसिस ऐसे है कि जैसे दिल्ली में मुख्यमंत्री ने बोला कोविड के दौरान कि भाई हम रेंट माफ कर देंगे, लेकिन एक्चुअल में उन्होंने किया नहीं। फिर ये मामला दिल्ली हाई कोर्ट में गया। दिल्ली हाई कोर्ट में जस्टिस प्रतिभा सिंह ने कहा कि नहीं, आपने प्रॉमिस किया है और ओपनली प्रॉमिस किया है, आपने प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस करके प्रॉमिस किया है, तो आपके ऊपर एक स्टॉपर लगेगा, आपके पास ये आपकी ड्यूटी बनती है, आप उसको प्रॉमिस करो। वो बड़ा अच्छा जजमेंट है। मतलब मुझे लगता है भारत के इतिहास में पहली बार एक सीएम के प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस को डील करके किसी भी हाई कोर्ट या सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने पहली बार एक लैंडमार्क जजमेंट दिया है। वो सबको पढ़ना चाहिए। जस्टिस प्रतिभा सिंह का जजमेंट है। बाद में उसके बीच में पैरा नंबर आई थिंक 62 से लेके 70 तक बहुत जबरदस्त उन्होंने पूरा वर्ल्ड वाइड क्या क्या चल रहा है उस पर करके उन्होंने दिया है। तो एक तो हमारा यह है कि एक भारत में मॉडल मैनिफेस्टो बने। अभी भारत में मैनिफेस्टो नहीं है, मॉडल मैनिफेस्टो बने और उसमें जो प्रॉमिस हो रही है उसकी प्रायोरिटी ऐसे हो कि फर्स्ट फंडामेंटल राइट, उसके बाद डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल, उसके बाद अगर आपके पास पैसा बचता है तो आप जो करना है करो। तो फंडामेंटल राइट का मतलब वो आर्टिकल 14 सिक्योर करो पहले आप इस तरीके का जुडिशियल सिस्टम ठीक करो कि लोगों को 6 महीने साल भर के अंदर मुकदमे का फैसला हो जाए। आर्टिकल 14 का मतलब आप इस तरीके का पुलिस सिस्टम क्रिएट करो कि क्राइम कम हो, हमारा पब्लिक और पुलिस का रेशियो मेंटेन हो, पब्लिक और जज का रेशियो मेंटेन हो। तो पुलिस रिफॉर्म, जुडिशियल रिफॉर्म ये उसका पार्ट हो गया। इसी तरीके से आप एजुकेशन को आप इस तरीके का करो सिक्योर करने के लिए आर्टिकल 21 जो हमारा कहता है जहां मंत्री और संतरी के बच्चे एक साथ पढ़ सके, गरीब अमीर के बच्चे एक साथ पढ़ सके। तो आप शुद्ध पानी दो, शुद्ध हवा दो, 24 घंटे बिजली दो, अच्छा आप जुडिशियल सिस्टम क्रिएट करके दो जहां पे क्राइम कम हो, करप्शन कम हो, बाकी चीजें कम हो। ऐसा अच्छा पुलिस सिस्टम क्रिएट करके दो जहां पे क्राइम कम हो। तो सबसे पहले आप फंडामेंटल राइट सिक्योर कर लो, उसके बाद डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल को इंप्लीमेंट करने पे आ जाओ। आप शुरू कर दो आर्टिकल 37 से लेके आप एक एक करके आगे बढ़ते चले जाओ, आप उसको इंप्लीमेंट कर लो। फिर पैसा बचे तो आप कुछ करो। लेकिन इलेक्शन कमीशन पहले एक मॉडल मैनिफेस्टो बनाए जिसमें पहले में सीरियल नंबर लिखा हो, दूसरे में लिखा हो कौन सा फंडामेंटल राइट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का कौन सा प्रोविजन से रिलेटेड है, तीसरे में लिखा हो प्रॉब्लम क्या है, चौथे में क्या है कि हम प्रॉमिस क्या कर रहे हैं, पांचवें कॉलम में लिखा हो कि ये जो प्रॉमिस है एग्जाम्पल के लिए कि मैं ये करने जा रहा हूं, वो उसका इफेक्ट कितना आएगा, टेंटेटिवली कितने लोगों के लिए हम करने जा रहे हैं। मान लीजिए हम स्कूटी या कुछ किसी चीज का वादा कर, स्कूटी तो आर्बिट्रेरी हो गया, मतलब अगर हम कुछ और भी वादा कर रहे हैं, लाइक अनाज दे रहे हैं या कुछ और भी कर रहे हैं, तो एग्जैक्टली वो कितने लोगों को हम कवर करने जा रहे हैं और जितने लोगों को कवर करने जा रहे हैं उससे इकोनॉमिक इम्पैक्ट क्या आ रहा है। तो एक हर मैनिफेस्टो में एक इकोनॉमिक इम्पैक्ट असेसमेंट का कॉलम होना चाहिए, लास्ट कॉलम होना चाहिए, जहां हमें ये पता चले कि कम से कम राइट टू, हमारा जो वोटर्स का राइट है, हमें जानने का अधिकार है। जैसे हमें एडीआर के प्रयासों से ये पता चलने लग गया कि भाई किसने क्या अपराध किया है, एडीआर के प्रयासों से भी पता चलने लग गया कि भाई ठीक है आपके पास आपके एसेट क्या है। तो हम ये चाह रहे हैं कि अब हमें ये भी पता चल जाए कि आप जो वादा कर रहे हो, वो वादा जो कर रहे हैं उसके बाद हमारे प्रदेश के ऊपर कितना और बर्डन आने वाला है, वास्तव में हमारा प्रदेश उस बर्डन को सस्टेन करने लायक है कि नहीं है। एक तो ये हमारा, हमने मॉडल मैनिफेस्टो की मांग किया है। फिर दूसरे में हमने कहा फ्रीबीज। फ्रीबीज में हमने यही कहा है, ये मानना है कि फ्रीबीज और वेलफेयर स्कीम्स को डिफाइन करने की जरूरत है, और इसको डिफाइन करना कठिन है, लेकिन ऐसा भी नहीं कि बिल्कुल हो ही नहीं सकता है। जो प्रोमिसेस फंडामेंटल राइट को सिक्योर करने के लिए है, आप जो प्रॉमिस मैनिफेस्टो में आप फंडामेंटल राइट को सिक्योर करने के लिए आप फुल प्रॉमिस कर रहे हो, उसको मैं मानता हूं वेलफेयर स्कीम। जिसको आप डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल को इंप्लीमेंट करने के लिए आप करते हो, उसको मैं मानता हूं ये भी वेलफेयर स्कीम है। लेकिन फंडामेंटल राइट, डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल और कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के और भी जो प्रोविजंस हैं, उसके अलावा जितनी भी चीजें हैं उनको देखना पड़ेगा कि वो फ्रीबीज हैं या वेलफेयर स्कीम है। टेंटेटिवली मेरा ये मानना है कि इसके अलावा जो चीजें हैं वो वेलफेयर स्कीम नहीं है, फ्रीबीज है। और हमारे पास फंडामेंटल राइट को सिक्योर करने के लिए तो पैसा नहीं है, हमारे पास डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल इंप्लीमेंट करने के लिए पैसा नहीं है, लेकिन हम वादा कर रहे हैं। और वादा करने का इफेक्ट क्या होता है? वादा करने का इफेक्ट होता है कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के प्रोविजन के ठीक उल्टा हम चले जाते हैं। उदाहरण के लिए आर्टिकल 47 कहता है भारत में नशाबंदी शराबबंदी होनी चाहिए। अगर आप नशाबंदी, फर्स्ट तो ये है कि आप नशाबंदी शराबबंदी करो। नशाबंदी शराबबंदी नहीं कर सकते तो उसका नेक्स्ट स्टेज ये है कि आप उसको कंट्रोल करो, उसको रेगुलेट करो। लेकिन पॉलिटिकल पार्टियां वादा कर देती हैं, पैसा होता नहीं है, तो बाद में सरकार बनाने के बाद उसको फुलफिल करने के लिए दारू की दुकान बढ़ाती हैं। मैं उत्तर प्रदेश का रहने वाला हूं, जहां पहले 10 किलोमीटर के, मेरे बचपन में जहां 10 किलोमीटर के दूर पे शराब की दुकान थी, आज मैं अपने गांव जाता हूं तो मुझे पता चलता है कि हर किलोमीटर मुझे एक शराब की दुकान नजर आती है, और उसमें कई करैक्टर हो गया, देसी शराब की दुकान, मॉडल वाइन शॉप, और पता नहीं और क्या क्या, मतलब 3-4 उसमें कैटेगरी कर दिया गया है। इस तरीके से कैटेगरी बना दिया गया है कि कहने को तो वो 3 किलोमीटर के ऊपर एक शराब की दुकान है, लेकिन वो 3-4 कैटेगरी बना दिया है, तो आपको हर 800 मीटर, 900 मीटर या 1 किलोमीटर के बाद एक शराब की दुकान खुलेगी। उदाहरण के लिए आप दिल्ली को देख लीजिए, दिल्ली में शराब की 50 मोहल्ले ऐसे थे जहां शराब की दुकानें नहीं थी, वहां 3-3 शराब की दुकानें खोली जा रही है, हर वार्ड में खोली जा रही है। पंजाब आज पूरी तरीके से बर्बाद हो गया। कहाँ? क्यों? क्योंकि पैसा प्रॉमिस करते गए, पैसा था नहीं, अंत में शराब की दुकानें खोलते गए। तो हमारे जो कहने को लोग कह रहे हैं कि हम तो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के हिसाब से चल रहे हैं और शुद्ध ये कर रहे हैं और कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को, लेकिन वास्तव में वो चूंकि पैसा नहीं है तो वो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के खिलाफ काम कर रहे हैं। जिन चीजों की मनाही दी गई है हमारे डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल में, वही काम कर रहे हैं। इसलिए मैंने कहा था कि सबसे पहले कहावत है, जितनी चादर हो उतना पैर फैलाओ। पैसा है नहीं, चाहे वो बंगाल हो, चाहे बिहार हो, चाहे उत्तर प्रदेश हो, चाहे हरियाणा हो, चाहे इवन दिल्ली। जो दिल्ली कहता है कि हमारे पास तो सरप्लस अमाउंट है, उसको आप देख लीजिए, 57,000 करोड़ तो उसके जो जल बोर्ड है वो घाटे में चल रहा है। 57,000 करोड़ का कर्जा दिल्ली जल बोर्ड के ऊपर है, जो कह रहा है कि हम तो मुफ्त में पानी देंगे। ऐसे ही लगभग 25,000 करोड़ के आसपास डीटीसी कर्जे में है, जो दिल्ली ट्रैफिक आपका जो बसें चलाने जिसकी ड्यूटी है, तो वो बस नहीं चला पा रहा है क्योंकि 25,000 करोड़ का कर्जा है। शुद्ध पानी नहीं दे पा रहा है क्योंकि 57,000 करोड़ का कर्जा है, लेकिन कह रहा मुफ्त पानी देंगे। बेसिक रिक्वायरमेंट होती शुद्ध पानी। एक गरीब आदमी आरओ सिस्टम को खरीद नहीं सकता, अच्छा वाटर प्यूरिफायर नहीं खरीद सकता। 50 रुपए वो पानी का बिल तो दे सकता है हर महीने, लेकिन आरओ नहीं खरीद सकता, वाटर प्यूरिफायर नहीं कर सकता। सरकार की ड्यूटी पहले वो शुद्ध पानी दे। हाँ, शुद्ध पानी के पास अगर उसके पास पैसा बच रहा हो तो वो मुफ्त पानी भी दे, कोई दिक्कत नहीं। सरकार की ड्यूटी पहले 24 घंटे बिजली दे, क्योंकि गरीब आदमी इन्वर्टर नहीं खरीद पाएगा। हाँ, अगर 24 घंटे बिजली देने के बाद भी उसके पास पैसा बच रहा है तो ठीक है, वो 100 यूनिट 200 यूनिट जितना उसको मुफ्त दे रहा है वो भी दे दे। तो और मुफ्त भी।
एक मिनट और
अच्छा सर, ठीक जी। हाँ, तो मेरा ये कहना था कि वो दोनों मैटर चल रहे हैं, और मुझे पूरा भरोसा है कि जैसे कमेटी बनी, हमने कमेटी में सजेस्ट किया था कि नॉन पॉलिटिकल आप संस्थाओं को ले लीजिए, जैसे फाइनेंस कमीशन है, लॉ कमीशन है, और इलेक्शन कमीशन है। इसके अलावा आरबीआई के गवर्नर को रख लीजिए, कंट्रोलर एंड ऑडिटर जनरल को रख लीजिए। ऐसे मैंने 5-7 संस्थाओं को कहा, सजेस्ट किया है कि इन संस्थाओं के जो हेड है उनको आप एक कमेटी फॉर्म कर दीजिए, और वो कमेटी 7 लोगों की पूरे देश के सभी पॉलिटिकल पार्टियों से सजेशन लेगी, सबसे बात करेगी, एनजीओ से सजेशन करेगी, एडीआर जैसी संस्थाओं से डिस्कस करेगी, जो लोग इसमें काम कर रहे हैं। करके अपना एक प्रपोजल बनाएगी, लेकिन उसको कंट्रोल करना जरूरी है, क्योंकि 70 लाख करोड़ राज्यों के ऊपर कर्जा है, 80 लाख करोड़ सेंटर के ऊपर कर्जा है, दोनों मिला दीजिए तो 150 लाख करोड़ कर्जा हो चुका है। और ये अभी जो कर्जा हमें मिल रहा है, चाहे वो वर्ल्ड बैंक से मिल रहा है, अमेरिका से मिल रहा है, जापान से मिल रहा है, वो इस आशा में मिल रहा है कि भाई ठीक है वापस कर देगा। लेकिन एक दिन तो ऐसा आएगा अगर इसको हमने कंट्रोल नहीं किया तो हमारा, जैसे लंका में, लंका को लोग कर्ज देते रहे, जब सबको समझ में आ गया लंका कर्ज वापस नहीं कर पाया, उसको कर्ज देना बंद कर दिया, वो एकदम हालत खराब हो गई लंका, मतलब पूरी पूरी उसकी इकोनॉमी बर्बाद हो गई। आज पाकिस्तान कोई कर्जा नहीं दे रहा है। हमारे पास भी कहाँ हो रहा है, कोई जितनी भी स्कीम चल रही, चाहे वो सड़क बनाते हैं बीओटी बेसिस बनाते हैं, भाई ठीक है सड़क बना लो, 50-60 टोल वसूलते रहो, तो हमारे पास सड़क बनाने के लिए पैसा नहीं है, अच्छा स्कूल बनाने के लिए पैसा नहीं है, गवर्नमेंट हॉस्पिटल बदहाल है, गवर्नमेंट स्कूल खस्ता हाल है, सड़क में गड्ढे ज्यादा है और लोगों का एक्सीडेंट होकर लोग मर रहे हैं। तो सरकारें सबसे पहले ये जो मतलब बहुत अट्रैक्टिव चीजें करने की बजाय बेसिक चीजें कर ले, अच्छे थाना बना ले, अच्छा पुलिस सिस्टम बना ले। मुकदमे जो है 5 करोड़ मुकदमे चल रहे हैं, 5 करोड़ मुकदमे से 5 करोड़ फैमिली टेंशन में है। 5 करोड़ फैमिली का मतलब एक परिवार में 6 आदमी रखिए, यानी 30 करोड़ लोग मुकदमों के कारण टेंशन में है भारत में। पॉलिटिकल पार्टियों को उनकी चिंता ही नहीं है, जुडिशियल रिफॉर्म की चिंता नहीं है। 20-25 हजार करोड़ लगेगा इस देश में, अच्छा जुडिशियल सिस्टम क्रिएट हो जाएगा, कोर्ट बन जाएंगी, जजों की संख्या बढ़ जाएगी, थाने बढ़ जाएंगे, लोगों को फटाफट न्याय मिलने लग जाएगा, क्राइम कम होगा, करप्शन कम होगा, उसकी चिंता नहीं है। कितना चाहिए? 25 हजार करोड़ चाहिए, लेकिन वो नहीं कर रहे। हाँ, स्कूटी दे दो, ये ले देंगे, ये दे देंगे, ये दे देंगे, ये दे देंगे। तो मेरा ये कहना है पहले आप फंडामेंटल राइट सिक्योर कर लो, डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल इंप्लीमेंट कर लो, फिर अगर बचता है तो जो इच्छा करो। धन्यवाद।
Dhanyawad, Ashwini ji. For those who may not have followed Hindi, I'll very quickly give the basic points which he has given in his PIL. Basically, he has said that the political parties should not randomly promise various freebies. First, there is a need to implement the basic directive principles which are given in the Constitution of India, things like health, education, and so on. And if there is money left for other things, then these type of things can be promised. However, the election commission should make a model manifesto which should be followed by all political parties. And the other suggestion he has given is that a committee should be formed which should comprise of like the CAG and law commission and various other constitutional bodies who can recommend as to how to tackle this problem. The basic thing being that the states are already in tremendous amount of debts, and their economic and financial condition does not permit these type of freebies to be given to the voters. So that is in a nutshell what he has said. Thank you, Ashwini ji. अब जब लास्ट में हम कुछ सवाल जवाब करेंगे तो मैं भी कुछ आपसे सवाल उस समय बताऊंगा और बाकी ऑडियंस जो भी होगा। तो अभी हम चलते हैं नेक्स्ट स्पीकर को। आई वुड लाइक टू नो इफ मिस्टर कृष्णमूर्ति हैज जॉइंड। इज ही अवेलेबल? I think he is having some issues in joining.
So
Nandini,
we can move to the next speaker. I'll just check with Krishnamurthy ji. We
okay,
have one.
you'll have to speak to him. Maybe he's on Zoom or something. He's not getting the link right. Okay. So then, what I would suggest, if we can get on to Shrimati Dr. Kakoli Ghosh Dastidar ji, she can give her views as a politician, as an MP, as to what is their take on the thing. So let me just give a very brief introduction about her. She is a third time member of parliament. She is from All India Trinamool Congress. Presently, she is an MP from the Barasat constituency in West Bengal. She is a doctor, MBBS, a medical practitioner, and she's published a couple of books also on certain medical subjects, and various papers have been published by her in the medical journals of international and national repute. She is also a member of various parliamentary committees earlier and even now. So, with that brief introduction, may I now request Dr. Kakoli, Ghosh, Dastidar ji to kindly give her views, 10 to 12 minutes, please. Thank you.
Uh,
Mm,
it's a topic by the people of the country, the state, and the economy. Because though I economic housewife, the way they manage their homes, of course, budget on tightrope budget, I think the country like that.
I think
The
there's
first
some internet issue, ma'am. We can't hear you very clearly. Your voice is getting cut.
uh,
Maybe she can mute her video. It might improve the
Yeah,
bandwidth.
yeah. If you can kindly mute your video, and then maybe the audio will improve. Just click on the video stop cam. Stop cam. Yeah. Please speak now.
can,
No, even now.
no,
No, ma'am. It's still, we can't hear you clearly.
Please use Wi-Fi, not the mobile net. Please use Wi-Fi.
no, it's not. But no,
Hello.
can,
It's the network, I think.
I think there's some network issue. Sometimes when the network is weak, then this type of thing happens. Um, okay, sir. Then shall we move on to the next speaker? Then we can see if if her network can be sorted out in the meantime. Okay. Nandini.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. I'm getting in touch with her. Sure, sir.
Okay. Then please tell Divya to load Dr. Ajit's PPT. I'll request Dr. Ajit to be the next speaker. Dr. Ajit Ranade is a founder member and trustee of ADR. Uh, he is BTech from IIT Mumbai. He's done his MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. He's done his PhD in economics from Brown University, USA. And till February this year, he was the chief economist of Aditya Birla Group. And presently, he was in after February, he was appointed as the vice chancellor of the Gokhale Institute of Political Science and Economy in Pune, where he is currently based. Since he is an economist, I would request him to cover the economic aspect. The argument which Mr. Ashwini Upadhyay has given in his PIL to the Supreme Court is basically that there is not enough money. However, the opposition and various other people, what about the corporate loans which have been written off in lakhs of crores and various other schemes wherein the NPAs and the banks and so many other places are there. So does that rarely this PIL does it have economic background as has been projected to the court? With that little bit of backdrop, may I now request Dr. Ajit Ranade to kindly take on? Thank you.
Thank you, General Anil Verma. I will take about 10 minutes. As you said, the opposition says, what about this and what about that and what about this? So that's usually an argument technique used for whataboutery, and it is inescapable. But let me just try and present some, as you said, economic angle. Whatever Mr. Ashwini Upadhyay said, जो कुछ उन्होंने कहा है, there can't be any issue with it. The government should spend responsibly. Government should spend as much resources we have and not overspend. Government should be truthful in what it is doing. Government should enforce what is in the constitution. ये जो सब अभी जो लिस्ट है इसमें बिल्कुल कोई बहस नहीं है, no disagreement. I think the problem is that this debate has happened because of the word has loaded meaning. So let me just go through this a few points that come to my mind. Can we go to the next slide? So first point is that there is no precise definition of the word free. And in fact, the word is loaded because इसमें वो free है कि आप किसी को free दिया जाता है, तो it is the at best I can define it to be that when somebody receives a receiver or a consumer what you're receiving if it be less than the full cost of what you're receiving, in a way you're getting free. So, for example, farmers in India, when they buy fertilizer, especially urea, they are paying only 25% of the cost of producing urea. This has been going on for many, many years, decades in fact. This is called fertilizer subsidy. And the total burden on the central government is more than 1 lakh crore, sometimes it is 2 lakh crores, which is a huge amount. We never talk about fertilizer subsidy in the context of freebie, but it's been going on for a long time. I recently, a few years ago, I looked at the tuition fee collected by a typical IIT. So IIT student pays only 5%, will be shocked to know that the tuition fee paid by an IITian used to be only 5% of the total budget of an IIT. We never discuss IITian as enjoying a freebie. So in some ways, the use of the word freebie is pejorative, implying it is undeserved. अगर किसी को freebie दिया गया तो वो थोड़ा सा negative connotation है. उस word में the word itself carries a negative connotation. Also, this usage is context specific. If free electricity is given to farmers, it is called freebie. But if it is given to industry, or if it's given in highly subsidized form, or if it is given as a tax holiday for 10 years, then it's called an incentive so that the industry will come and invest something in the backward region. So the same action is sometimes called freebie, sometimes it's called an incentive. And therefore, the freebie concept is intertwined with the concept of welfare spending. Next slide, please. So I would suggest that any expenditure on schools, on hospitals, on midday meal schemes, on vaccinations, on public buses or trains, public transportation, has always got an inbuilt subsidy and therefore an element of freebie. I mentioned the starkest example is the IIT or fertilizer, but actually if you look at spending, all these items have got subsidy inbuilt. That means what the consumer pays is not the full cost, and therefore an element of freebie is inherent. So, for example, when the government of India decided to give free vaccinations, it ensured that there was universal coverage, and even if even for 400 or 500 rupees was not charged, so that it prevented the spread of the pandemic, which would have spread much more if you didn't have complete and universal vaccination. Now, this is an example of a classic public good. When I get vaccinated, I get protected, but if somebody else is not vaccinated, then that person becomes a danger to rest of society. So the government, in its wisdom, decides that it will give free vaccines. By the way, free vaccines were not given in COVID in other countries. Many other countries did not give free vaccinations, even the developed countries. But India decided that given the nature of our country, we will give free vaccination. Now, is that a freebie? Of course, we don't think of it as in the freebie debate in the freebie language. We are not using free vaccine as the example of a freebie. So similarly, highly subsidized primary school education, in especially in rural areas, I would say also like the vaccination is a public good. I think having children get primary school education also is an element of public good. So in fact, if we make primary schooling free, I would not call it a freebie because this is the foundation or stepping stone to becoming good citizens or informed citizens of the country, at least primary school. But highly subsidized tertiary education, like primary, secondary, and tertiary. So giving highly subsidized IIT education possibly is not justified as a public good because the benefit of that education predominantly goes to that person. So if you're an IITian, you get benefit of the subsidy. In fact, many IIT students, they end up going to America and securing very good job. They become, very wealthy. Some people may say that they are promoting brand India, and India's standing in the world is enhanced because of the success of IIT alumni. So it's a debatable thing, but I think compared to primary school and tertiary education, subsidy is has an element of subsidy, it's not public good. Now, any welfare spending on poverty alleviation, skilling, training, primary healthcare, this cannot be termed as a freebie in that sense of public good. Next, please. So basically, what happens is that if you agree that some welfare spending is required on ensuring, the public good, provision of public good, whatever, such health, education, so on, drinking water, that will definitely be fiscal deficit because that comes from the government, whether state government or central government. So, for example, during the pandemic, there has been a spending on free food grain. We have the National Food Security Act, but the government has made 5 kilos of food grain free per person per month. Now it's been running for 26 months. Then similarly, there is a PM Kisan scheme which gives out cash. I think a few thousand rupees per farming household has been going on for many months. Then free vaccines I already mentioned. This has contributed to 10% deficit for central government alone. 10%, which is the government 10% of GDP, by the way, which is 20 lakh crores. 10% amount is 20 lakh crores. This is just the deficit. But we never think, we don't get worried about that. So today, and incidentally, today's deficit is tomorrow's taxes. If you borrow today, if the government of India or state government goes into deficit today, they're borrowing money either from the bank or from the public, from the deposits, but they have to make it up and they have to repay those that loan. So therefore, they have to tax tomorrow's generation. So the burden is actually passed on to future generations of unborn taxpayers. Those taxpayers are not even been born yet. During 2004 to 2013, this kind of welfare spending was complemented, that is, it was supplemented by a rights-based approach to development. So, for example, we had right to food, we had right to work, the MNREGA, or right to education, and all of these have fiscal implications. For example, the National Food Security Act, which is right to food, that alone costs 2% of GDP. I mentioned that that was 3 rupees rice, 2 rupees wheat, and 1 rupee jowar or bajra. But that has now been completely free for the last 26 months. It has been made free. Similarly, right to work, which is about the MNREGA, it costs 0.5% of GDP, which is 1 lakh crore every year. Is that a freebie? That's a question we need to examine. Next, please. So, incidentally, in MNREGA, we now have a modification since last 8 or 9 years that this welfare spending, which is supposed to be on public projects like social forestry, building roads, or tank rehabilitation, now it is going more and more to private asset creation. They are giving MNREGA public funds for housing enhancement of private houses, or building toilets, private toilets, or enhancing private land qualities. Does that not sound like freebies? You are using public funds to enhance private assets. And this is becoming, if the last 2-3 years data is showing much and more of MNREGA funds are going towards this, that is private asset creation. Should we call them freebies? Similarly, PMGKY, the Prime Minister's Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana is now running for 26 months and may still be extended phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 1, phase 6. Phase 6 is 80,000 crores. This free food grain is the largest free food grain scheme in the world. 18 crore beneficiaries. So we call it freebies because it's free. The food is free. So then cumulative losses of power distribution company, electricity distribution companies in the country is more than 1 lakh crores. But I think, sorry, it is 2 lakh crores. But half of it is because state governments have not paid to DISCOM. It's not the free power. It's the state governments have budgeted something that they will compensate the DISCOM, but they did not compensate. And then, of course, what General Anil Verma also mentioned, if you look at the cumulative write-off of bad loans, that is non-performing assets in public sector banks. Public sector banks have public money, public deposits. In the last 7 years, 11 lakh crores have been written off, completely written off. These loans are not coming back. Imagine the amount of fiscal impact this has, because this money has now to be recapitalized through the central government funds, because the central government is the 51% owner of these banks. So that has much bigger impact than the kind of freebies we have been talking about. Next slide, please. So basically, I think the freebie debate, as Mr. Upadhyay also said, has come because of these promises of political parties in campaigns and pre-election. So I don't think we can fully regulate the behavior of political parties when it comes to promises of freebies. In fact, he referred to this High Court judgment, which said that if a government has made up, or the party has made a promise, they better fulfill it. But the manifesto is not the same as a government budget. When the party makes a manifesto, that doesn't have the same sanctity as the budget. When the union finance minister or the state government finance minister presents a budget to the legislature, whether Lok Sabha or Vidhan Sabha, that has a sanctity. That budget is a proposal which gets the approval of the House and it has sanctity. The manifesto does not have a sanctity. It is just a manifesto. But the EC Election Commission can perhaps bring in responsible promises through code of conduct. We have the model code of conduct, which has no legislative basis, which has no basis in law, and yet it's been in force for 20 years or 30 years. Perhaps the EC can introduce some responsible way of making promises to the voting public. But ultimately, it is up to the voters to determine the credibility of campaign promises and the fiscal burden of freebies. We cannot say that ultimately, the voters have to decide, are these freebies in our interest? Are these freebies credible, these promises? The adverse effect of today's freebies is mainly on tomorrow's generation. It is like we are stealing money from our unborn children. हम लोग चोरी कर रहे हैं. When we expand our fiscal space beyond our revenues, when we borrow from tomorrow, tax burden is going to increase on tomorrow. तो उनका पैसा हमने चोरी किया. So excessive. Additionally, by the way, urea, which is 75% subsidized, it has adverse effects like this in Punjab and Haryana. The soil salinity due to excessive use of urea, because it's so cheap, has become extremely saline. The productivity has fallen, and now there is increased incidence of cancer in those states. So you have actually long-term negative effects in many other ways. Next slide, please. So finally, I would like to conclude by saying, ensuring basic rights of citizens and voters, as I mentioned, that is provision of public goods, including primary education and healthcare, vaccines, public transportation, drinking water, that cannot be called freebies, because freebies has a negative connotation. And decreasing inequalities in society is also not a freebie. If you have fiscal policies which are going, for example, PMGKY, Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana, it is because the poor people would have been affected by food inflation. They are actually given 5 kilos of in-kind food grain, and if they had been only given cash, they would have not been able to buy because the prices are going up. So that actually has helped them protect to some extent food security. So decreasing any such expenditure which is distributionary policy, I don't think can be called a freebie. And in fact, this makes social spending more fair. So what is fair and what is unfair? Fairness is not an economic concept. Economics books cannot define what is fair. It is a social concept. And only society can determine, or citizens or voters can determine what is fair and what is unfair. Ultimately, this debate is about what is fair and unfair spending, and what is personal enrichment through freebies. And I think this is it's a conversation in society, conversation between people, voters, and their elected representatives, or conversation between candidates of political parties and voters. So I think that's where it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ajit. That was a very good exposition on the economic factors, and you've explained I would say, what exactly the implication of freebies is. It is largely misunderstood, and you've given so many factual examples and statistics which push the question mark, make us think, food for thought, whether those things qualify as freebies or something else, or welfare measures or social welfare measures or whatever. Thank you very much. And we will, I think Mr. Krishnamurthy is now available. So, sir, can you hear me? Is he muted?
Can
Hello,
you hear
sir.
me? Can
Yes,
you hear
sir.
me?
Now we can hear you, sir. Thank you. Welcome,
you.
sir.
Thank you.
I think you are having some joining issues with your...
Yeah, true.
So, without wasting much time, sir, we will straight away jump into the discussion. I'll give a very brief introduction for the audience. Mr. Krishnamurthy is a former IRS officer. He was the 13th Chief Election Commissioner of the Election Commission of India from 2004-2005, during which he was also responsible for conducting the general elections in 2004. But otherwise, he was an election commissioner in the Election Commission from the year 2000 onwards. He was the first IRS officer to become secretary to the Government of India and the Chief Election Commissioner. In his educational background, well, he's won gold medals in history, economics, political science, etc. from Mysore University. He's also done masters in fiscal management in UK, and he's also published a book called Miracles of Democracy in the year 2008. Sir, I would request you to kindly give the perspective from the Election Commission's point of view. Kindly go
Absolutely,
ahead,
absolutely,
10 to 12
absolutely,
minutes.
absolutely.
Thank you.
First of all, let me apologize because there was some internet problem connecting the program. My
No
sincere
worries.
apologies. My sincere apologies for that. In any case, I partly heard both the madam and Mr. Anadi presentation, but let me first begin with some kind of a conceptual clarity on the subject. I think the concept of freebie came into prominence only during the election times, though it is now extended to cover all welfare measures. I think as far as this seminar is concerned, we should, I personally feel we should confine ourselves to the implications from the point of view of electoral management. You know, the government giving any welfare measure, nobody has any objection. It gives an impression as though that freebie means all welfare measures will be controlled and regulated. Certainly not. I think we have to distinguish between welfare measures and electoral promises. Welfare measures executed by the government after they come into party comes into power, we do not have any say because they are all subject to legislative control. There is the Public Accounts Committee, audit, and so on. I don't think we should confuse ourselves with the welfare measures undertaken by a party in power with the electoral promises. The main reason why the Election Commission did not approve these these electoral promises by political parties, either through the manifestos or in their press conferences, was the fact that it violates the concept of level playing field for all the political parties and the contestants. It gives an undue advantage to the parties to say that we can promise the moon to you, we will give whatever is possible within our time, but we will give these are the promises that we make for a section of voters. For example, cycles for girl students, or laptops for the college students, or for that matter grinders for the housewives, and so on. When you give certain benefits, which I call it as private or merit goods, for the benefit of a section of voters, these are the things which we should really seriously worry about, because most of the state, particularly the state elections, most of the parties contesting the state election seem to be vying with each other to promise almost everything that is possible in the world to ensure that they get the necessary votes from the various vote banks. Obviously, the worry of the Election Commission and probably the worry of the public financial economy should be whether such promises should be really be allowed, and whether such parties promising so many things without any financial support, whether they should have an undue advantage over others. So my own personal feeling is, do not include freebies to all welfare measures, including waiver of bank loans and so on. So best thing is confine our conceptual clarity only to freebies promised by political parties during the election time, either through the election manifesto or through their public meetings. The second point I would like to stress is the promise to lure investors, the voters, is by either through public goods or through certain merit goods. The public goods, like suppose a political party in its manifesto says we will build certain bridges, or that we will build a stadium, or we will build a school. These are public goods which we may not have any objection so long as the funds are available for the government to implement. But what is most objectionable and questionable is the promises made to a section of voters, which in my opinion amounts to bribing the voters. Normally, the measures, promises made by political parties may not be questionable, but if it is only once in a while such promises are made. But now it has become a disease in the electoral scenario now. Almost every political party, particularly the state election, they have been promising so many things. It has become a widespread practice. It is a disease which has overtaken the election scenario. Now the question is how to control it. Only promises to section of voters or general welfare measures should be allowed. In my opinion, we should not allow, if possible, ban any promises given to voters or a section of voters, as it will come under the Indian Penal Code as well as Representation of People's Act. In case the political parties are not willing to have such a ban, the other thing should be that they should make a statutory warning. They should be required to give a statutory warning saying that these are measures promised subject to the availability of funds, or this is the amount that will be incurred. It will either be found by additional taxation measures or by cutting down the existing expenditure. But the most important thing is the political parties may not agree to a ban. Now the question is whether Election Commission under its existing powers can deal with this without any statutory backup. In my opinion, it is not possible. Even after including it in the Model Code of Conduct, it does not give any authority to the Election Commission to completely ban these things, or to, at best they can give a censure. That is not enough. If you really want to arrest this menace, there should be a statutory provision. It should either you ban them or at least ensure that there are warnings given and they are required to indicate how they will find the funds for financing such measures. I think I have made a reasonable presentation of the problem relating to the election management, and all that I would only say is we cannot deregister political parties mainly on the ground that they have given some promises in their manifesto. So we must have a statutory backup, and certainly the Election Commission, when once it has the necessary power, either to impose a monetary penalty or to disqualify the voter or the party, then it will be effective to deal with these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnamurthy. That was a very good exposition from the point of view of the election management. We will now request, I think Dr. Kakoli Dastidar has left because she had some other engagement. So we will miss her presentation, though we heard a little bit of what she was saying. I will now request Mr. Alok Prasanna to give his views. Before that, a quick introduction. He is the co-founder and lead of Vidhi. He is BA LLB honors from Nalsar. He did it in 2008. And he's done his BCL from Oxford in 2009. He writes a monthly column in the Economic and Political Weekly and has published in the Indian Journal of Constitutional Law, National Law School of India. And he frequently writes in various newspapers like the Hindu, Indian Express, Scroll, Quint, Caravan, etc. And he has also practiced in the Supreme Court and in the Delhi High Court. Now, though I am aware that Mr. Ashwini Upadhyay is also a Supreme Court lawyer and he is given his perspective, which of course, since he is a member of the BJP, I dare say it is a bit political as I see it. But from Alok, I would request that you give a purely legalistic analysis of the whole thing as to what you think from that point of view. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Colonel Verma, and good evening to everyone. It's an honor to be on this webinar. Let me start off by saying that my points that I had prepared, I think I must have accidentally shared it with Dr. Ajit Ranade because he said exactly the same things already, about half the points, including the data points that I had mentioned. So it's one of the disadvantages of being the last speaker that some of the points that you had prepared have already been made. But let me start by endorsing that point of view. Any good lawyer, and Colonel Verma have said to give the legal point of view, but any good lawyer always starts with the facts. And the facts, of course, I think Dr. Ranade has very clearly laid out for us, which is that I think conceptually there are two issues here. One is, of course, that it is not possible for us to, with any clear basis, say this is welfare, this is a freebie. And I completely agree with him on saying that the term freebie itself carries a kind of pejorative connotation, that we think this is something undeserved, this is something which these people should not get. And I am not so sure, I'm not an economist, but let me sort of put it from a slightly different perspective. I'm not so sure even a lot of things that are considered private goods should not be considered freebies, because let's take the example that has been sort of talked about, two examples that have been talked about quite a bit. Say free motorcycles or scooties for women, free cycles and scooties for women, or free wet grinders for women. This, I would say, is actually something which greatly empowers women. We have seen in Bihar, for instance, that giving free cycles to girls has improved their access to education, allowed them to go to school without fear of harassment or a long wait time, has freed up more time. And likewise, the use of wet grinders, the number of hours that it has saved for women in terms of their daily chores, it has allowed them to focus on other things, including children's education, including health of the family, and a bunch of other things. So there is research to show that even what we might classically consider, these are private merit goods, have larger benefits across society. Let's also not forget, today what we are calling as public goods were dismissed as private goods 30, 40 years ago. I recently happened to write a column on how the midday meal scheme in Tamil Nadu was initially dismissed by everyone as this is a waste of money. This is not going to do any good. This is pointless. This is useless. And there was a time when Dr. Manmohan Singh, as chairperson of the Planning Commission, had even said, why should we give money for this pointless waste of resources in Tamil Nadu? But that very same Dr. Manmohan Singh, when he was eventually Prime Minister of India, ensured that funds from the ensured the midday meal scheme was a legal entitlement under the National Food Security Act. So these things, it's not always possible to draw this hard and fast line. The second conceptual point that I sort of want to come back to is this idea that we can prescribe to politicians what sort of promises they ought and ought not to make in the context of an election manifesto. Let me at the outset clarify, I'm not saying that things like hate speech should be allowed, things like, calling for violence or personal targeting should be allowed. Of course, that should not be allowed in any election campaign or in any manifesto. Beyond that, the idea that we should regulate in the larger interests of the economy or public debt within a manifesto, I think goes against two very fundamental aspects of our constitutional system of governance. One is, of course, freedom of speech and expression. I don't think there is a better expression of the idea of marketplace of ideas than an election campaign in India. You see all sorts of ideas come about. Yes, a lot of us who are somewhat more privileged may dismiss a lot of these as, the same old freebies and religion and caste appeals. But if you actually listen to the speeches made by politicians, if you actually listen to the ground level messaging that goes to various people across parties, you will find that there are a lot of ideas being tossed around. There are a lot of promises made. It's not just promises. There is an idea behind this promise that a political party espouses. And when we say that this particular kind of idea should be expressed in only this one particular set of ways, we are in some ways impinging on the freedom of expression of political parties. And that is a very dangerous turn for our democracy. We are saying, and again, let me point out, I'm not saying that the guardrail should not exist. The guardrails against hate speech, violence should, of course, be there. But within those guardrails, if we are either going to try and shrink those guardrails to a much narrow path and say all political parties should make only this kind of promise or only the one of these two kinds of promises, that is putting freedom of speech, one, in a dangerous place, and two, the idea of democracy as a marketplace of ideas in a very dangerous place. Because democracy thrives on difference. Democracy does not thrive on everyone saying the same things or everyone making the same kinds of promises. The implicit idea of a parliamentary democracy is you are able to put ideas out there during the election campaign, during the election time, have those contested, say this is right and this is wrong. The second point that I want to come to is this unfortunate idea that we have a lot of constitutional bodies such as the Finance Commission, the Election Commission, the CAG. Law Commission is not a constitutional body, but it's a statutory body. We somehow seem to think that these bodies can guide or manage our democracy. Unfortunately, that is not true. They all perform very, very important tasks in the field delimited for them under the Constitution. The Election Commission, for instance, and I don't need to say more, Mr. Krishnamurthy, who was former Chief Election Commissioner, is here. Its job is to ensure the free and fair conduct of elections. The moment we try to give the Election Commission an ambit beyond this very important role, what happens is that the Election Commission's credibility gets weakened, it ends up doing its primary job badly, and we get the worst of both worlds. The election commission's primary job is diluted, the other functions it is not able to perform well, and there is loss of faith in the election commission as well. Secondly, bodies like the Finance Commission are not permanent bodies. It's unfortunate that the court was not aware of this. As a student of constitutional law, I'm always somewhat disappointed when courts make such egregious mistakes in the public forum. Because let's not forget, every minute of important cases are now live tweeted, they're carried the next day. And for the court not to be aware that the Finance Commission is not a permanent body is somewhat unacceptable to me. And in this situation, even, and for that matter, even the Law Commission is not a permanent body. The Law Commission is only set up for a period of 3 years. The Finance Commission is set up every 5 years for a very specific purpose. And we cannot ask them to do additional jobs to say, why don't you take a look at this? Why don't you take a look at that? Why don't you take a look at this third thing, fourth thing, and so on and so forth? That to me is constitutionally unsound because it dilutes the focus and the purpose of these bodies. These bodies, likewise the CAG, if we go back and read the Constituent Assembly debates, there has been very serious thought that has been put into what should be the institutional design of a body such as the CAG, the Election Commission, who should be part of it, what should be its mandate. There has been elaborate debate as to if this is the mandate, these are the people who should be in the body, this should be the protections they should enjoy. When we slowly start to expand their mandate without clearly thinking about how we're upsetting the balance, the fine constitutional balance that has been maintained between these bodies and other institutions in the Constitution, we are upsetting a very fine constitutional balance, which I think the court should not have gone into. I hope the court does not go into. And one would hope that the court is aware of this constitutional balance before it starts pulling in the Election Commission, the Finance. I appreciate the fact that the Election Commission has come out and said this is not our job. Obviously, the Finance Commission doesn't exist on paper and cannot come on board. But my simple point remains that this is a fine constitutional balance which should not be upset on a particular issue. Thirdly, and this is the last point that I sort of want to make, is that this is not the court's business to go into. In terms of how money is got by the government, in terms of how money is spent by the government, this is not something for the court to go into. Unfortunately, our courts have stepped into a lot of issues which they have absolutely no competence about, and they have in fact compounded matters much worse. They have not actually addressed the real problems that was brought before them because they went above and beyond what was asked for. I don't want to multiply examples, but there is an excellent book by the scholar called Anuj Bhuvania called Courting the People, which looks at the history of PILs and looks at the history of how courts have been very keen and eager to go beyond the mandate of a PI and only to find that they have actually ended up causing more damage. He gives the example of demolitions in Delhi. He gives the example of a lot of so-called environmental litigation, which have actually resulted in much worse outcomes for everyone concerned because courts were not the right fora to bring this issue. No doubt, the issue of how state governments use their money, raise their money is an important matter for public debate. I do think this is something that public finance experts, former bureaucrats, politicians, and of course every citizen of India should be part of. This is not a debate which can be done under the aegis of the law. The law cannot prescribe that this is how a freebie should be defined, this is how welfare should be defined. The law cannot prescribe this is how the party should prepare their manifesto, and this is how they should fulfill the requirements in the manifesto. By the way, prior to the Delhi High Court, I think Mr. Ashwini Upadhyay also mentioned this, prior to the Delhi High Court enforcing the rent waiver, in the Madras High Court, I think back in 2017, had extended the farm loan waiver to more communities beyond what had been extended by the state government on the basis that the chief minister and the ruling party in their manifestos had said that farm loan waivers would cover a whole range of people. Now, this is problematic in and of itself because the concept of estoppel is in the sense of not a personal promise by someone. A person may be making a promise as a chief minister of a state, but in the context of an election campaign, in the context of something done during the course of elections, they're not making it in exercise of their official functions. And that it would be very problematic to introduce that concept. Estoppel is essentially a concept in private law. Even in administrative law, its introduction into administrative law in some other context has been deemed to be very problematic because it blurs the boundary between an individual saying something in their individual capacity as opposed to an institutional capacity. So to that extent, I would say that is also a problematic area for courts to get into, to say just because the former chief minister or the chief minister said this is how we are going to interpret government policy, because you're not interpreting government policy as if it's an individual person's promise. Government policy is made by the institution. It is not the instrument of an individual's will. So let's also clarify that. And finally, I would like to end with one point, which I think maybe Mr. Ranade mentioned a little bit, Dr. Ranade mentioned a little bit, which is on the revenue side of this discussion. I think a lot of this discussion has focused on how government should spend their money. Perhaps it will make no sense to talk about it without getting into the point of how do governments get their money. Because at the end of the day, if the pie keeps shrinking, we can keep cutting out a lot of things as quote unquote freebies. All we are just doing is making the quality of life worse and worse for people without looking at the very obvious way of how do we increase government's revenues in a lot of ways. And in this context, perhaps the point made by Dr. Ranade becomes important. Why do we call tax waivers as incentives? Why do we call tax holidays as necessary for the economy? Why do we consider, however, when it goes to a different class of people, as a freebie? And in this respect, I think we also have to take into account the taxation structure in India. It is heavily weighted towards the union government. This is something which is a feature of our constitution, that the union government has far more powers to levy taxes than state governments. And it is the responsibility of the union government to share tax revenues with the state government. Unfortunately, what has happened in the last couple of decades or so is that the union has found newer and newer ways to avoid sharing this tax with the state government. Not to say that it has all been only one way. States have also increased their tax revenues through various measures. But one example that I want to give before I close is the issue of cesses. The union is supposed to share tax revenues, but the union says we don't have to share cess revenue. And when more and more tax revenue is collected by way of cess, it means that very valuable revenue for a lot of state governments is being cut off. They are not getting a share in an increasingly larger pie on a very specific and technical ground. So to this extent, I would like to sort of point out that we also have to look at the revenue side of things. I just saw there is one comment which came from Mr. Krishnamurthy about taxes on rich agricultural income earners. So I'll just make this point very quickly. A lot of states did impose taxes on agricultural income. They had a fairly high threshold and they said, yes, we will only tax agricultural income earners. But the difficulty happened because agricultural income, unlike salaried income, is dependent on a lot of factors. Me as a person who earns a salary, I know I earn X amount every month. It can increase by 5%, it can decrease by 5% in the next year. The government can plan and know X amount of money is coming. Unfortunately, in agriculture in India, because it is still heavily dependent on the monsoons, or for that matter, the weather, we know for a fact that this year there is going to be a massive hit into agricultural production because of the heat wave and the ongoing floods in South India. There is going to be a dramatic shortfall. What states realized, sir, is that the income from agricultural income was too unpredictable. They didn't know if they're going to get more this year or less this year, which meant it became very difficult for them to plan. It became very difficult for them to understand how much money we're going to get. And eventually the actual amounts were relatively small when compared to, say, sales tax, the earlier sales tax, excise tax, now of course GST, and property tax and various other sources of revenue. Agricultural income was a relatively small source of income. It was relatively unpredictable, and therefore a lot of states which used to levy agricultural income tax, especially I know Karnataka used to because of all the plantations along the along the Western Ghats, which were very productive, but they realized that because profits from agricultural income are very variable and very difficult to predict beforehand, they decided it was not worth the effort of having a separate department to levy and assess agricultural income. So there is that concern, policy concern also on that front, So I just thought I would answer. So with this, I'd like to end my talk. Over to you all. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Lok. Good exposition. You covered various issues. Uh, now, there are no questions really from the audience, but we can discuss a few issues. A lot of issues have been thrown up actually. There is a viewpoint that there is a question of freedom of speech involved. Political parties cannot be sort of cowed down. In a democracy, they are the ones who should be deciding how the money should be spent. The government should be deciding. There is another viewpoint that as far as the electoral management goes, there are issues about what they promise in their manifesto. Manifesto is a different thing, generally not implemented, mostly, as we have seen, not even taken seriously by a lot of people. Then is the issue, like Mr. Alok has said, that it is not at all in the purview of the court to be legislating, or rather giving some decision on this sort of a thing. Then the point comes to the topic as such, in which our second part is what would be the effect on the democracy. So in this case, who then will decide of this vexed issue? Should it go to the parliament? Will the political parties have a discussion on this? As per the Chief Justice in the hearing, he said political parties are not going to do anything. So, Election Commission, if I recall correctly, in the 2013 Balaji versus State of Tamil Nadu, wherein PIL was filed regarding corrupt practices, freebies being corrupt practices. The Supreme Court had then ruled that it does influence the electorate and shakes the root of free and fair elections. Therefore, they directed Election Commission to frame guidelines in consultation with the political parties. Now, those guidelines were made and issued in 2016. But who follows them? Nobody follows them. So, that is one issue. The other issue is also the model code of conduct. We see so many projects, foundation stones, a flurry of them, maybe 3-4 per day, person flying from place A to B, and do these projects ever fructify, or how many of them actually fructify? So these, I feel there are pretty complex questions, and I would like to now ask Ashwini Upadhyay ji कि जैसे आपने कुछ लोग ये भी बोलेंगे कि आपने जब ये पीआईएल दायर करी, वो पंजाब इलेक्शंस पे फोकस थी, क्योंकि वहाँ पे आम आदमी पार्टी आई है और आप पहले आम आदमी पार्टी में थे, अभी बीजेपी में थे। पहली बात ये। दूसरा, जो आपने उदाहरण दिया था लिकर माफिया का और लिकर के, वो तो आप गुड़गांव में देख लो, वो तो आपका बीजेपी रूल स्टेट है। 50 गज पे 100 गज पे एक एक ठेका है हमारे रोड पे आसपास में। तो आप ये अगर कहें कि भाई फलाना पार्टी ये कर रही है और फलाने स्टेट में हो रहा है, वो हम समझते हैं ये चीज़ तो सारे ही स्टेट्स में ऐसा है। तो अब रेवेन्यू कैसे जनरेट करना है, वो हम उस डिबेट में नहीं जाना चाहते कि एक्सपेंडिचर कैसे करना है, रेवेन्यू कैसे वो करना है। लेकिन सवाल जो कृष्णमूर्ति जी ने उठाया, आलोक जी ने उठाया, कि क्या ये कोर्ट के दायरे में है, इसके ऊपर फैसला हो सकता है, या ये पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज को डिस्कशन करके और पार्लियामेंट में इसका कुछ निकलना चाहिए? अश्विनी जी।
सर देखिए, पहली बात तो पीआईएल का मतलब ही होता है गवर्नमेंट का फेलियर। मेरा सीधा सीधा मानना ये है कि सरकारें अपना काम अगर ठीक से करती रहे तो पीआईएल की जरूरत ही क्या है। आप क्रिमिनलाइजेशन के खिलाफ पीआईएल करने क्यों गए थे सुप्रीम कोर्ट? क्यों? क्योंकि सरकारों ने कुछ नहीं किया। हम भी क्यों करते रहते हैं सुप्रीम कोर्ट में? क्योंकि सरकारें नहीं करती हैं। भाई सामान्यतया सरकारें दो चीज के लिए कानून बनाती हैं, या तो वोट के लिए बनाती हैं या तो नोट के लिए बनाती हैं। जहां लगे कि ये कानून बनाने से इतना % वोट बढ़ जाएगा तो वो कानून बनाती हैं, और फिर या तो लगता है कि भाई ये वाला काम करने से इतना 1000 करोड़ का फायदा होगा तो वो फिर बन जाता है। सामान्यतः यही देखा गया। तो पब्लिक, तो 2-3 का मैं आपको जवाब देता हूं। पहली बात तो ये, पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज आर पब्लिक अथॉरिटी। हाई कोर्ट के बहुत सारे जजमेंट आ चुके हैं, और सुप्रीम कोर्ट में आपकी एक पीआईएल है जहां आपने कहा है कि पॉलिटिकल पार्टी को आरटीआई के दायरे में लाया जाए। आपने थोड़ा डिफरेंट ग्राउंड लिया हुआ है। हमने तो ये कह के ग्राउंड लिया है कि पॉलिटिकल पार्टी को आरटीआई के दायरे में लाया जाए बिकॉज दे आर द पब्लिक अथॉरिटी। हमारा सीधे सीधे एक ही ग्राउंड है, क्योंकि वास्तव में भारत को सरकार नहीं चलाती है। वास्तव में भारत को, चाहे वो केंद्र की सरकार हो या राज्य की सरकार हो, वास्तव में पॉलिटिकल पार्टी चलाती है। पॉलिटिकल पार्टी मैनिफेस्टो बना देती है, जैसे ही वो गवर्नमेंट में आती है वो मैनिफेस्टो उस, अगर स्टेट का मैटर है, चीफ सेक्रेटरी के सामने टेबल पर रख देते हैं। मुख्यमंत्री बन, जिस दिन मुख्यमंत्री बनते हैं अगले 2 दिन के बाद बैठक बुला के सारे सेक्रेटरीज की बैठक में कहते हैं ये मेरा मैनिफेस्टो है, आपको इसके अकॉर्डिंग काम करना है। तो पॉलिटिकल पार्टी, प्रेसिडेंट कौन बनेगा पॉलिटिकल पार्टी तय करती है, प्राइम मिनिस्टर कौन बनेगा पॉलिटिकल पार्टी तय करती है, चीफ मिनिस्टर कौन बनेगा पॉलिटिकल पार्टी तय करती है, गवर्नर कौन बनेगा पॉलिटिकल पार्टी तय करती है, और यहां तक कि चीफ सेक्रेटरी कौन बनेगा, कैबिनेट सेक्रेटरी कौन बनेगा, ये सब भी पॉलिटिकल पार्टी तय करती है। इनडायरेक्ट करती है अलग बात है, लेकिन करती है। तो हम पॉलिटिकल पार्टी को ऐसे ही कह दें कि नहीं नहीं उसको फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन, फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन सबको है, लेकिन फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन इज सब्जेक्ट टू पब्लिक ऑर्डर, हेल्थ एंड मोरालिटी। तो अगर पॉलिटिकल पार्टी की आप देखें तो पॉलिटिकल पार्टी को जो फंक्शन है, चाहे वो मैनिफेस्टो बनाना या कुछ भी हो, वो भी सब्जेक्ट टू पब्लिक ऑर्डर, हेल्थ एंड मोरालिटी हो। अब हेल्थ किसकी? पॉलिटिकल पार्टी की थोड़ी, देश की इकोनॉमिक हेल्थ। पॉलिटिकल पार्टी जो भी काम करे वो कंट्री की जो इकोनॉमिक हेल्थ है उसको ध्यान में रख के काम करे। ऐसे थोड़ी होगा कुछ भी वादा कर दे और काम हो जाए। दूसरी बात, एक मॉडल मैनिफेस्टो की जरूरत क्यों है? मॉडल मैनिफेस्टो से किसी का फ्रीडम ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन कर्टेल नहीं होगा। हम लोग हाई कोर्ट में पिटीशन फाइल करते हैं या सुप्रीम कोर्ट में पिटीशन फाइल करते हैं, अगर एक पिटीशन का ड्राफ्ट का एक मतलब एक मॉडल ना हो, एक लिस्टिंग प्रोफार्मा ना हो, फिर तो हर व्यक्ति अपने अपने तरीके से पिटीशन फाइल करेगा। पूरे देश में अगर आप हाई कोर्ट जाओगे तो पर्टिकुलर सेट है, पर्टिकुलर प्रोफार्मा है, उस प्रोफार्मा में आपको पिटीशन फाइल करनी है। अगर सिविल का मैटर है तो आपको ये डिक्लेरेशन देना है, क्रिमिनल का मैटर है तो ये डिक्लेरेशन देना है। तो राइट टू नो ये फंडामेंटल राइट है। हमारा राइट टू नो में हमारा ये भी जानने का हक है कि पॉलिटिकल पार्टी क्या वादा कर रही है, और राइट टू नो में हमारा ये भी जानने का हक है कि पॉलिटिकल पार्टी जो ये वादा कर रही है इसका लार्जर इंपैक्ट क्या होगा और करंट इंपैक्ट क्या होगा, स्टेट के ऊपर क्या इंपैक्ट होगा और इकोनॉमिक इंपैक्ट क्या होगा, इन्वायरमेंट इंपैक्ट क्या होगा। सारा इंपैक्ट हमें जानने का अधिकार है। ऐसे तो नहीं छोड़ा जा सकता कि भाई ठीक है पॉलिटिकल पार्टियों के पास दो फंडा, वो तो जो उनके पास राइट है वो एब्सोल्यूट नहीं है, किसी के पास कोई एब्सोल्यूट फंडामेंटल राइट नहीं है। इसलिए मैनिफेस्टो को एक मॉडल मैनिफेस्टो बनाना जरूरी है। सारी पॉलिटिकल पार्टी उसमें क्या लिखेगी क्या नहीं लिखेगी ये उसकी मर्जी, ये उसका है। लेकिन फंडामेंटल रिक्वायरमेंट क्या है ये इस्टेब्लिश कहां से होगा? ये इस्टेब्लिश आपका फंडामेंटल राइट से होगा। अगर आप फंडामेंटल राइट को सिक्योर नहीं कर पा रहे और आसमान से तारे तोड़ के देने की बात कर रहे हैं तो ये तो अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल हो गया ना। सबसे पहले आप जो फंडामेंटल राइट है उसको सिक्योर कर लीजिए। राइट टू हेल्थ, राइट टू क्लीन वाटर, राइट टू वाटर, राइट टू क्वालिटी एजुकेशन, आप वो फुलफिल कर दीजिए। राइट टू रोड, राइट टू इलेक्ट्रिसिटी, ये फुलफिल कर दीजिए। उसके बाद अगर आपके पास पैसा बच रहा हो, भाई वर्मा जी मैं तो सीधे सीधे कहता हूं, अगर मेरे जेब में 1000 रुपए है तो 1000 रुपए से मैं 5 स्टार होटल में खाना खाने थोड़ी जाऊंगा अपनी फैमिली को लेके। 1000 रुपए से तो फिर मैं अपना बजट ऐसे मेंटेन करूंगा कि भाई ठीक है हमारा जहां पे काम हो सकता है कुछ घर में खा लो, कुछ थोड़ा बाहर से ले लो, मिठाई बाहर से ले लो, बाकी चीज घर में बना लो। ऐसा तो नहीं हो सकता हमें फ्रीडम है कि हम कुछ भी कर ले। जब हमारे जेब में 1000 रुपए है तो हमें 1000 रुपए के हिसाब से अपना बजट बनाना पड़ेगा घर का।
ओके, अच्छा, थैंक यू। अभी मैं एक सवाल जो पूछना चाहता हूँ, डॉक्टर अजीत रानाडे और मिस्टर कृष्णमूर्ति इस पे काइंडली बताएं कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट का हमने देखा है दैट देयर इज अ थिंग व्हिच हैज स्टार्टेड अपॉइंटमेंट ऑफ कमिटी बाय द सुप्रीम कोर्ट। Of course, we have our views that this is not a matter to be decided by the Supreme Court at all. That is a viewpoint from here. But let's say, in case they are seriously thinking of giving some judgment on this, do you think it is a good idea to appoint a committee, or is that sort of postponing the decision? You know, like all good government offices do, they appoint a committee and then it just keeps going in a loop.
Can I come in first before Mr.
Yes,
Krishnamurthy?
please. Yes,
In
Honorable
it,
Rana.
in its wisdom, the Supreme Court has decided to entertain the petition. Mr. Upadhyay, of course, has filed the petition in, as I said, in uh, great earnest and, of course, with public interest in mind. But as Mr. Alok Prasanna also said, it is actually entering into a domain where jurisprudence cannot have any effective things to say, I think. It is like saying, ki, please make our promises more credible. Our politicians, please make our politicians behave better. Please make our politicians say the truth. Please make our politicians cleaner. So these are things between the voters and the public. We have to elect people. We have to, first of all, 1.3 billion people. Surely we can find a bunch of people who are cleaner and more honest and more committed to public service. If we can't find this credible, candidates or politicians, the parties, it's between the voters and citizens and the parties. And I don't think the jurisprudence has really anything uh, effective to say. So, but now that they have entertained the PIL, now they will take its course, they'll appoint committees. But I am really not very hopeful because, as has been repeatedly said in this seminar today, that the definition between freebies and welfare spending is very blurred. Even though Mr. Krishnamurthy has made a very specific comment that we should only discuss in the context of electoral. But electoral promises, as I said, manifesto does not have the same sanctity as a budget. There is no law of the land which says that manifesto becomes a binding document that you can take to court for not. So this is when we have that law, then we will see. But to my mind, manifesto does not have the same sanctity as the budget. In fact, when the budget is presented in Parliament or in the Vidhan Sabha, we should hold the government accountable. There are so many slippages. Look at the budget presented in 21 February and look at the actual spending that despite the excuse of pandemic. There is routinely slippages, huge slippages. So actually, the budget is a more sanctity. The budget promises are have more sanctity, but routinely the government slips up 1 or 2% slippage hota hi hai. And that is in magnitude terms, 1% of GDP is 2 lakh crores. Slippages are of 2 lakh, 3 lakh. In fact, last year's budget promised for 6% fiscal deficit. The actual came out to be 10%. 4% of GDP is 8 lakh crores of slippage. Mind-boggling number. That has more sanctity than the campaign promises. Anyway, that's my view.
Mr. Krishnamurthy, you have given a lot of comments which we have read. If you could kindly comment on the question which I had asked. There are just a few minutes left.
Because the first question I would like to know is, do you want to regulate things or not? If you think that the political parties should have the freedom and the manifestos can promise anything, because it is not, as Mr. Ranade said, it is not sanctified, then we want that chaotic situation to continue or not. Two, if you want, as far as the committee is concerned, if you are serious about implementing a committee's report, committee is useful. But if you are going to use it as an excuse for delaying decisions, it is not worth it. So my own suggestion is, if Supreme Court can give broad directions as to what are to be followed by the political parties, that may be even good enough. There may not be any need for a committee, but if they want to constitute a committee, make a scientific study and so on, there should be a time limit within which it should be done, and it should be implemented. The Supreme Court should say that the Election Commission should implement at least those decisions which are consensuously taken by the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnamurthy. We've just got 2-3 minutes left. I'll request the speakers to give their closing remarks now. Mr. Alok Prasanna, if you could kindly give your closing remarks.
Thank you. Just to summarize, I think what has come about, I do think that a discussion on how the government gets its money and what it spends it on, what are useful, what are not useful, it's necessary to have it. It is necessary to have it in a context where we don't dismiss some spending as freebies and some as welfare. It's where we sort of approach the question and what is in the interest of the economic health of the state and of the nation. And that, I don't think, is a discussion which can be done through pure law, legal, or jurisprudential basis. It's a wider discussion which needs to involve, or it would have been lovely to hear Ms. Kakoli Ghosh Dastidar as an MP, her take on this, but it would have to, of course, involve MPs. It would have to involve, of course, experts in various domains. But finally, I want to just leave us with this thought. The people of India have been exercising their electorate, have been exercising their right to vote for the last 70 odd years. And while we may question the choices in a lot of places, on average, if we look at where India is in 2022 and where it was in 1950, I'd say that the electorate was not wrong most of the time. They have voted out governments, they have voted out leaders, they have voted out parties, they have voted out ideologies. They have shown that over a period of time, they sift the chaff from the wheat. They know that this kind of unrealistic promise we're not going to buy. I mean, if electorate was so simple that if elections were so simple that you promise something and they vote for you the next time, no party would have lost elections. Everybody who was in government would have stayed in government. But I think we have to, at some level, also understand and trust that the electorate of India, by and large, probably has more wisdom than is given credit for in elite circles. So, just on that note, I'd like to thank ADR for giving me this opportunity to speak. It's been a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Alok. Mr. Upadhyay, Ashwini ji, आपका कोई closing remark? Has he left? Okay. Mr. Krishnamurthy, would you like to say something in the end?
Well, only from the electoral angle, I would still believe that some ideas should be clarified either by the government by way of law or by the Supreme Court by its guidelines, because the Election Commission's powers are very restricted. They do not have an authority to impose certain penalties for violations. For example, if a particular freebie amounts to bribery or not, he cannot conduct a quasi-judicial proceedings and take a decision, because election has to take place within a particular time frame. So my own idea is, if there can be a clarity in whatever form, either through a law or by a Supreme Court judgment, it would be desirable. Whether you want to make a serious study, because I do not think in the name of freedom we should allow everything to happen. There must be some kind of a regulation. But if you do not want a regulation, if you think that the voters are wise enough to choose, well and good. I have no problem on that. But don't criticize Election Commission for not doing anything. If Election Commission has to do something, it must regulate, and regulate for free and fair election. So it is for the government or the court to decide. And as far as Election Commission is, it has got a constitutional responsibility to conduct free and fair election. Whether it will come within that purview, whether it has an authority to do it, is a moot point. I have very strong views. There must be some authority for Election Commission to proceed against the political parties in case you think that it is wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnamurthy. Dr. Ajit Ranade, if you could kindly give your closing remarks and also wind up the discussion.
Thank you, General Verma. I have 3 points to make. Number one is alluring. So that's what Mr. Krishnamurthy said. So to the extent that the debate has started, at least the voters will be forced to confront this concept that we are being bribed. There is an element of bribery in freebies, and we are being allured or lured into vote, and there will be more alertness about this. And so to that extent, it's a good concept. I mean, it's a good thing that it's entering a debate. Because anyway, that's first point. The second point is that this debate is also forcing us to focus on the quality of expenditures, of all public expenditures, and that's a good thing. For example, not many people know that the biggest item of expenditure for the central government is neither this freebie nor that freebie nor this. It is actually interest on the debt. It's about 6, 7 or 8 lakh crores is simply the interest on the big, huge mountain of debt. And that's non-discretionary, it has to be paid. But what many people know, even fewer people know, is that even bigger than the interest is this element, what Alok Prasanna also mentioned, is the free giveaways to the corporate sector. These are called, there is a separate statement in the union budget for the last few years. It's called tax expenditures, which is the loss to the exchequer on account of various tax holidays and tax concessions. This is even bigger. It's actually bigger than 8 lakh crores. I think my second point is that if it focuses public scrutiny of quality of expenditure, that's a good thing. And last point is that while we are concerned about the size of fiscal deficit, the history of modern India last 30 years, we see that economic growth has continued despite high deficits, because our demography is a huge plus point. That in per capita terms, unborn generations are going to be bigger. The set of people between the taxable age of 80 to 60 or whatever is actually expanded for the next 2 or 3 decades. it means that the per capita tax burden of postponing HHS to tomorrow by higher fiscal deficits today is actually going to be manageable. That, of course, does not mean that we have a blank check to have unlimited spending, but that is a silver lining. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ajit. And in the end, I would like to thank all the panelists, Mr. Krishnamurthy, Dr. Ajit Ranade, Mr. Alok Prasanna, even Dr. Kakoli, though we couldn't hear her fully, for a very lively debate and very valuable insights which you people have given, including Mr. Ashwini, he is not there, for filing the PIL in whatever way. Let's see how it goes. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure having all of you on board. On behalf of the ADR team, I would like to express my gratitude to you for accepting to be available for this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.